Okay, so neuroscience behind the Enneagram. I'd like to start with some background and then we'll get into more of the framework we'll be working with and then into the individual types. So, some quick background. They use the Enneagram for self-development through self-awareness, mindfulness, and movement around the different points. Tonight, I'll be referring to everything as a point because we might have a type, but it doesn't mean we don't travel to different places. In fact, we all travel to all 9 points. So I encourage you to have an expanded idea as we go into this and not limit yourself. I also find as I'm working with the Enneagram, I've found a lot of value in viewing it through different lenses to help me better understand the symbol and how I can work with it. So one of the lenses is lived experience, and that's really helpful to hear directly from people. There's panels that they have a lot of times, the Enneagram, and the narrative Enneagram school really leans into this particular view. It's very useful. You can also look at it through spiritual traditions. There's a lot of history with the Enneagram with that. You don't have to go through spiritual. But within the symbol, there is a path to enlightenment, some deeper connection with the divine. We won't be working with that today, but it's very much, they don't conflict. That's what I like to say. And then finally, scientific and psychological look at the Enneagram. I'm really interested in this because I'm really interested in science and psychology. And I love finding how we can line the Enneagram up with studies in other fields. For example, they did find they were studying infant temperaments and not looking at it from the Enneagram at all. And they found that there are 9 infant temperaments, which gives us an idea of how early our type forms. But from everything I've found in this area, what I'm going to present tonight holds up the best and I've found to be the most useful. So that's why I'd like to share it. That's why I'm excited to share it. Some background in terms of where this came from. I want to make sure to credit people who deserve a lot of credit. First, the knowledge came from lived experience first. So within that narrative tradition of learning from panels, there was a group of 5 people working with psychology and science, and they got together. They were in these panel groups and they said, you know what? Let's see if this lines up. And they formed, this was 20 years ago. Here's the group. This is David Daniels, Dan Siegel, Laura Baker, Jack Killen, and Denise Daniels, and they formed together to see how can we create a model of the Enneagram based on theory and research drawn from interpersonal neurobiology. That's an interdisciplinary framework for the understanding of the mind and mental health. And so what did they find working together over all these years? First, they looked in a lot of different areas, but I feel like they hit gold when they looked at the work of Jaak Pansep. He's an Estonian-American neuroscientist in psychobiology, and he coined the term affective neuroscience. So it's the name of the field that studies the neural mechanisms of emotion. And affective is just another way to say emotion. And then they also started working with the work of James Gross and other prominent psychological thinkers in the 90s. They helped us better understand emotional regulation, and that's a key part of the framework that this group was working on. The group themselves, these 5 people, call themselves the PDP Group, and that stands for Patterns of Developmental Pathways. Okay. Where does Enneagram type come from in this system? Well, first, we all start out in the womb. And we have a feeling of wholeness where all of our needs are taken care of. But once we leave the womb, now we have to work for a living and make sure that we survive and that our own needs are met. How do we do that? Emotions. Emotions help us to make sure our needs are met by sending us impulses to make sure we take care of our needs. And behind every Enneagram point is a need that we need to look at and a way of managing to help us achieve that need. But if we overdo these patterns, these impulses can keep us trapped in unnecessary suffering with the patterns of emotions, thought, behavior that just kind of happen when they don't need to. And if you were here last week, we went into some of that and how that can show up in our lives. But overall, these emotional patterns, the way they play out in our life, they become the basis of Enneagram type and the patterns that we have. All right, this is our main neuroscience jargon that we're going to be working with tonight. I tried to simplify it and just pick out the pieces that I want to focus on that are part of this framework. So if you're more familiar with the brain and you're like, this is too simplified, it's simplified for a reason. I don't want to get too into areas that we don't need right now. So first, the area of the neocortex, it's here in green, and it wraps around the entire top of our head. Named the neocortex because it's the newest part of our brain to develop. It is kind of a thinking part of our brain. It's where our conscious mind lives. It's also in the Enneagram where the head center lives and where our fixations will play out. So these are those thought patterns that keep our Enneagram type going. And then we've got a subcortical region, and so that's here in pink. And for the purposes of tonight, I'm going to focus on the limbic system that's part of the subcortical area. And that's where the emotions come from. That's the emotional part of the brain. And this is where our initial type impulses and the passions are going to arise as they travel throughout our brain and our body. Because this brainstem here, this is like right at the back of your skull, is going to be the pathway that sends information from your brain to your heart center and your body center, and also vice versa. There's actually more information coming from our body and our heart into our brain than vice versa. So just because we're going to be talking a lot about the brain today, I do want to make sure that those centers are a part of the whole system, even though we won't be talking about them in too much detail. Okay, all right. Neuroplasticity. Neuroplasticity is the function by which we can create our own patterns of thinking. So it just means the brain's ability to shape itself based on how you're thinking. So once you've got a thought, a neuron is firing down a particular path in the brain. Other neurons afterwards are more likely to choose that same path. It's just like if there's a bunch of snow that's come down and someone else has walked through the snow, you're more likely to choose that same path. It's the path of least resistance. And then in the brain, once you've got neurons that have been firing down a path for a little while, and it's like, oh, we're getting some traffic here, the brain takes steps to make sure it's easier to go down that pathway in the future. So I've got kind of as a metaphor, these little highway construction men making it easier to drive down this road, changing it from a dirt to paved, and finally you can make it into a superhighway where it goes really fast and really easily and becomes almost automatic. And these, as we make these pathways easier and easier to go down, you can think of them as kind of grooves in the brain, and they create those habitual patterns of thinking. So if you find often you start at one thought and you wind up at the other one almost all the time, it's because there's a highway going through. Now, just because you have a pathway, a highway, doesn't mean it can't be changed. You can change it through conscious effort, but it takes a lot of effort to get it started because you're kind of back in the snowy area and you have to forge a path to start thinking differently. But the road workers will come to help make it easier once you start putting in that effort. Okay, All right. So looking at the PDP framework itself, Jaak Pensep found that deep in the center of the brain, there are 7 core subcortical pathways that provide us with the primal emotions, and those are there to keep us safe and help us survive. And he found that these pathways are true for all mammals. So, in theory, that means the Enneagram can be applied to mammals in general. And we know from deep brain stimulation, where you can actually touch the parts of the brain right here and cause these emotions to come up. So on the left, you see the main happy emotions or positive emotions. They're kind of easier and more pleasant for us to feel. Excitement is there to help us with seeking behavior. We want to be able to seek out food, resources, anything good that we need to survive. We have joy to help us with play and make sure that we get that, which is actually a need. We treat it as something that's not needed. It is a need. If you look at some of the most violent people, almost all of them didn't get to play as children. And we still need to play as adults. We need joy. We also have care and love, that like positive feeling when you feel the warmth in your heart and it makes you want to take care of other people and share your love with them. The social and bonding is just so important to us as humans and as mammals. And finally, we have lust. If we don't reproduce, we're not going to survive as a species. And then I also have here the 3 negative emotions. And it seems to me that with the negative emotions, they're even more important for survival. It's really motivating to get a negative emotion. So we can get anger, which leads us to get more agency in life. We need agency, and when we don't have it, it'll trigger that anger pathway. And then to help us with bonding, we have a pathway that will provide us with sadness or separation distress if we don't have adequate bonding. And this sadness can help motivate to find bonding and better bonds. And also, it can help us to grieve a loss and help disconnect if we need to, a bond that we've lost. And finally, we have fear, and fear drives us to help with certainty and planning and preparation. You know, as humans, if we don't understand the seasons and when the river near us floods, our farming isn't going to be very useful. So we need to have a world that conforms to the way we think it's going to happen, more or less, in order to navigate life. And when we don't have something what are those bushes over there and what's hiding behind it, we want to have a little bit of fear so we can be cautious or look behind things, whatever is appropriate. The interesting things about the negative emotions here is they live in this particular part of the brain called the periaqueductal gray. You don't have to remember the name. But it's really required for living life. There's a lot of parts of the brain where if the brain gets damaged, we can still survive. Sometimes it can write differently or we can find some way to cope. But if this area is damaged, in animals, they will just stop trying to survive. They won't seek food. The only way they'll eat is if you put the food in their mouth. And within a couple months, they spontaneously die. So it is super, super important. And the reason I'm highlighting this is because sometimes it feels like our Enneagram type is a prison, but I want to highlight just how important it is and how grateful I am that these negative pathways exist. They're super, super needed. So don't wage war against them. They keep you alive. And if you come next week, we'll talk more about how we can work with them. All right, last part of the framework, I talked about how we learned in the 90s more about managing emotions. And there's 3 key ways that you can manage emotions. The first one we're going to talk about tonight is regulating. I have an emotion and I fully experience and express it. I make it almost bigger so I can really feel it and work with it. Sometimes we really need to do that. Other times it's more adaptive to downregulate, to contain and channel the emotion. So we'll still have a flavor of the emotion, but it's going to be much lesser. And that allows us to work with it and channel it into an appropriate area so we don't get overwhelmed and we're still able to be competent in how we work with it. And then other times we want to shift the emotion. And so that is, you can think of it as reframing and redirecting. The emotion comes in and it's like, this isn't really the time for it, but I can reframe it as this other thing and work with that instead. There are times where we have an emotion come up, but it's not appropriate to act on it. And so it can be super adaptive to shift it to a different experience.
Sophia,
And yeah.
Faith has a question. I don't know if you want to address it now. She's asking if you could repeat the region of the perical gray, the region of negative emotions. Do you want to go back, or do you you're kind of
All
on the
right.
move?
So yeah, Faith, I put how you spell that in the chat. Um, and to help you find it.
Perfect. Thank
And
you.
okay, do you need any more?
No, that's great.
Awesome.
Thank
Yes.
you.
Wonderful. Okay, cool. Upregulate, downregulate, shift. All right. Now Dan Siegel, he was one of the PDP group, and the phrase that he is becoming very, very famous for is where attention goes, neural firing flows, neural connection grows. This is what we were talking about before with that neuroplasticity with the highwaymen who go out and make things easier. And so what this means is when you put your attention on one of these pathways and managing the emotion in a specific way, neurons that fire to that area get more and more. So you have more and more of this construction and roads, and they start becoming highways. And it just makes it easier to go there in the future. And over time, that's how type is formed. So we have these different pathways and different ways to manage emotions, and they can be flexible. But when you keep going to the same thing over and over again, that's how these emotional habits become more inflexible. And they start really getting like set in stone a little bit, it might feel like. And it's also when we're looking at the emotions, it's how the passions of each type start forming, those emotional habits. It's the connection with those emotions and how we continue to keep engaging with them. So whichever, I'm going to call them ABC pathways, agency, bonding, and certainty. Whichever one of those negative emotions is the most deeply grooved, that becomes the filter we have on life, shaping our perspectives and our worldview. AK, I see you have a question.
Yeah, I was trying to understand if this is applicable where people say you can't teach an old dog new tricks, and if that applies to humans to a certain degree where people are set in their own ways, similar to this concept of set in stone, or a tree that snaps. Yeah, if you could maybe expand on that, thanks.
Yeah, and I think that that is part of that phrase and where we get it, but it's proven to be not true in humans. So it's like true to a certain extent, right? Like the neuroplasticity happens, and the more we do it, the older the dog gets, let's say, the more we keep doing the same things, but we absolutely can teach ourselves new tricks. So it was maybe 100 years ago. I'm a little fuzzy on the dates, but at some point we actually thought that you couldn't reform the brain, that once it was formed, it was done. There's nothing you can do about it. And we've learned more and more that that's not the case, that we can change it. It's just hard. And if you're trying to get someone else to change, that's not going to work. They're going to they have to want to change themselves first. But yeah, it is possible, but it is difficult.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, good question. So whichever one of the ABC pathways is originally chosen by those first neurons that are starting to fire and build that pattern, that builds up over time, makes your type. There's still a question about how much nature versus nurture is involved in which pathway is chosen. It seems to be that temperament is part of it. So if you have, say, a much more introverted temperament, you might choose one of the more withdrawn types to choose from. So temperament is a part, but it also seems to be something in, it could be something in very early development, but it's certainly not going to be something that happens, oh, when I was 8, my mom said this, and that's why I'm type blah, blah, blah. It happens way before that. So that would be an example where your perception on the world has changed how you saw that event, more than that event being the trigger for why you're that type. Okay. And that brings me to whatever you look for something, you're more likely to find it. So because of these highways forming in your brain according to your type, it means that future experiences are more likely to go there. So for example, if your type is within the certainty pathway, you're going to be asking yourself more often, is there something to doubt here? Should I be questioning this? Am I safe? And the more you question it, the more you're going to go down that fear pathway, and you're building up that highway to the fear system, which means the world is going to feel more unsafe to you over time. It's the same thing with the bonding or agency concerns, and you may find that too in the world that you're looking at. It doesn't mean the world is necessarily as uncertain or the bonds are as weak as you might think. So keep that in mind. What you habitually look for, you tend to find. So for example, 9s are known for both wanting to avoid conflict and seeing conflict where other people don't see it. It feels like a conflict to a 9, and everyone else is like, that was a conflict? That was just stating an opinion. And so whatever our type focus is whatever our perspective on the world is, and this is why. It becomes self-reinforcing. So here's an example. You're texting your friend and you're expecting a certain response, and instead all you get back is one word and it says busy, and it's totally out of character for your friend to respond this way. It's something is coming up in the world and it's not clear. Like there's a lot of missing information here, and when there's missing information, we will fill it in. And so depending on what pathway, which one of those neural pathways you're going to use, depends on how you're going to interpret this. So if you're a heart-centered type and all you get back is the word busy, you might go down that habitual path of, is our relationship still good? Am I being rejected? Is my relationship at risk? And just by asking yourself that question, you're going down that neural pathway. And it's going to likely bring up emotions related to sadness and separation distress. You might have an anxiousness or a feeling of rejection come up. And this might make it feel like relationships are more at risk than they actually are. So for example, I had a heart-centered cat, and he seemed to have amnesia about whether our bond was good. So he'd come up to me all the time looking for validation. Do you love me? I say, yes, I do, and show him love and all. And he'd go away. Okay, I feel good. Within a couple hours or a day, he'd come right back because he had those things going in his mind and was frequently questioning, is this relationship good? So if you get the same surprising text where it just comes in and says just busy, and instead you're a head type, you might automatically go down the certainty pathway and fear what could be happening. And this example came up in real life with a head-centered type. And within minutes of receiving this text, he was picturing these horrible things. Maybe one of my parents is in the hospital. Maybe there's another thing going on. All of these concerning possibilities just immediately came to his mind. And so when you have these patterns over time, that leads head-centered types to feel like the world is more full of things to be afraid of than it actually is. As Russ Hudson says, types 5, 6, and 7 scare themselves. And this is why. And if you're a body-centered type, you get the same text. It might not hit you, or it might hit the agency pathway. So you might get concerned, like, is there a power play going on? Was that the right thing for them to do? Should they have done something else? Or what should I do in response? What's my right action? You might feel frustrated, that like little quality of anger that you can't have the conversation you were hoping for. All right, so that is all of the new terms that I wanted to cover and a lot about the overall framework. For the next bit, we're going to go into the individual centers and the individual types. But before I go there, I wanted to give everyone a chance to see if there are any questions on the framework so far
I have a
before we
quick
get
question.
into
What did ABC stand for?
agency, bonding, and certainty. So it's back here. So see on the right, we have agency for anger, bonding for sadness and separation, distress, and certainty for fear.
Thanks.
I also see in the chat,
Yeah.
I wonder if it would be possible if taking environment into account, like trying to regulate low levels of social anxiety while at a concert where you're dancing and experiencing an overall positive experience. Yes. That's actually a good example of when you might have a firing that does social anxiety because you're worried about social stuff. Maybe you're a 6 and you have social anxiety, or maybe you're coming from a 2 place, anything like that. But then you're also having dancing in this other experience that might be lighting up the excitement or the joy pathway. And kind of feeling both of those feelings if you're one of those people for whom you have multiple feelings that you can feel at once. Anton, so you have a question.
Yes. This might just be like a because I use the word reframing or whatever word fits for, like, I liked how you said reframing or redirecting, like you notice certain thoughts and then you can shift them. Is it shifting the emotion or shifting the behavior? Does that make sense?
All
I
of
mean,
the above.
you could do both, but a lot of times I shift the emotion, but I mean, like, let's say that I'm having certain emotions and I'm walking down the street, then I can redirect my thoughts to shift those emotions, but I'm still walking down the street, if that makes sense.
Hmm. Yeah, yeah. And as I recall, I think you identify at type 7.
I could have that in my
Oh,
5.
5.
Yeah, I think yeah,
So you
2.
go to that point sometimes. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, what's happening when you're shifting an emotion is you have the first emotion hitting off in your limbic system, right? The center of your brain. And then you might have, it might be conscious or unconscious that it shifts into another emotion. So if it's unconscious, you'll feel it. You'll either feel the new emotion or you might even not feel the first emotion at all. So let's take a 9, for example, right? A 9 might experience a little twinge of anger coming up and then shift that into a more peaceful state. Or they might feel a lot of anger and then consciously come up with a reason to shift. So then it's going to go into your neocortex, and your neocortex has the fixation that says, I'm not important, my agency is not important. And so then it might tell you something like, oh, now's not the time. Or, yeah, it doesn't really matter. And so you'll have a thought up there, and then the thought goes back down into the center of your brain, and then will give you a different emotional state. So it can happen faster, a little bit slower, and you might be able to see it in that case.
Or the mixture of emotions. I definitely experience that at times as well. So yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Okay. Anything else before we get into the specific types? All right. Okay. The agency pathway, our first 8. our first A in the ABC, and this is going to apply to points 8, 9, and 1, our body types. It's going to come in a variety of flavors. So with anger, it kind of feels more like a spectrum. With, you get a little bit of irritated and frustrated, and it moves up to anger, then it could be rage, and just gets bigger, but it feels like a spectrum you can be on. And sometimes you'll ask someone at point 1, like, oh, are you feeling angry? And they're like, no, I'm not angry, I'm just frustrated. It's that same flavor. So when we're talking about anger, I mean the whole flavor of the spectrum. So with anger, it's this primal system for embodied empowerment. We need to ensure that the body's needs are met, and it prompts us to ramp up and be assertive or protective. It comes with agency in and of itself. It will allow you to move more. It gives us power to protect ourselves from violation, either by standing up or by making boundaries. So there's a lot of boundaries as part of this. And it also allows us to push past barriers to reach goals. There's a lot of strength to it. And this is one of those areas, because this is related to the body points. You're going to have the center of the brain involved, but also a lot of connection down the spine to the gut area. And there are actual brain cells in the gut that they've found, and in the heart. So it's going to involve both of them, moving energy in both directions. And when this pathway gets used more often, so if this is one of your main points or a point that you go to a lot, you might, because of your highways, it might be more likely to trigger boundary issues, control, agency. It'll make you want to do things more, actions. And that's why body types are more likely to be, say, stubborn or immovable. It's why they identify more with gut sensations and have a better connection with what's going on in their gut. And it's because they're literally paying more attention to those signals. There are literally more neurons firing. Okay. So there are the 3 points I was talking about that activate with this agency. And the first one is 8. And the reason I'm putting 8 first is because 8 is aligned with what this emotion of anger is trying to do. Anger is there to get us more agency. And with the point 8, we're wanting to move into action and increased agency. So how are we going to get that? We're going to regulate, because it's congruous. It's 8 is trying to get to the same place that the anger is trying to go through. So we want to experience and express the anger so that we can achieve this increased agency. And this is going to be true. Anyone goes to point 8, you're going to have that regulated feeling of anger. And then we have point 1. At point 1, we're having the agency pathway activated, but we're down regulating it. We're containing it and channeling it. So it might not feel like anger. It's more likely to feel like frustration or maybe irritation. And with that down regulation and the channeling, what it allows us to do is channel the agency into goodness, good action, right action, appropriate action, following the rules, whatever makes sense. So it's like, I want the anger, I want the agency, but I want to channel it into doing what's right. And then finally, we have the 9 point, which allows us to let go. So sometimes we have a desire for agency, that like agency impulse comes up, but now is not the time. And at point 9, that allows us to let the anger go and allows us to be in inaction. And sometimes that's necessary. Like I was saying earlier, we want flexibility to go to whatever of these points makes sense for right now and whatever we're going through. So with the 9, that's where we're seeing the shift, the reframe and redirect, either consciously or unconsciously. So with point 8, let's get in a little bit more detail on it. The emotion is anger. We're upregulating, we're really feeling it. And the orientation of our focus is outward. We're looking at actions in the external world, which might show up as doing what needs to be done, or the zest for life, what they call that like lust for life that comes up at point 8, the making yourself bigger. And you're also, that's where 8 is noticing who has the power, because the whole point of 8 is I need embodied agency, empowerment. So knowing who has the power and that outward focus is really important. And how does this help us with agency? By getting big, expanding into the world, I'm able to do whatever needs to be done. So it's that direct agency. But when we spend too much time here, like when we're thinking about being big and being that empowered person, we're not at that time paying attention to our own needs and vulnerabilities. Because our needs and vulnerabilities are not, as it feels like, in service to that increased agency. If we're vulnerable, that is in conflict with seeing ourselves as empowered. So it's not too much of a problem if we go to 8 sometimes, but if we go there a lot, we might really have this blind spot. And point 1, same thing. We start at anger, but then we down regulate it. So I'm feeling a little bit of angry, but not a lot, so that you can channel that. You still have the ability to act and that will and that power that anger gives you, but you don't necessarily just go for it. You don't necessarily make yourself big. You're channeling it into doing the right thing. And the orientation of the focus is inward, because we're looking at our internal standards. We might be looking at an inner critic, our moral compass, internal rules. And that's why every type 1 is trying to do the right thing. And according to them, like if you have 10 type 1s in a room, they're going to have 10 definitions of doing the right thing. And that's because they're looking at the internal standards as they're moving through the world. And why is this a good agency strategy? By upholding my standards, I can both take care of the body's needs, but I can also be appropriate and acceptable to the circumstance and make sure that I'm not going too far. But when we're doing this, when we stay at this point a lot, we're not paying attention to the times when it's time to relax our standards, when it's time to be messy, when it's time to produce sloppy work, when it's time to rest. I have a lot of point 1 in me, and I really struggled early in my career to balance quality versus quantity, because my internal standards were like really high quality. And so when I needed to get a lot done, when the quality didn't matter at all, but getting through a lot did, I struggled to produce sloppy work. It was just very hard. But through that conscious effort, I no longer have that struggle. And finally, point 9, my old friend. So we're starting at anger, we're shifting and redirecting to feelings of peacefulness, because those feelings of peacefulness allow us to be passive, allow us to go into inaction. And the orientation for the 9 is both inward and outward, which creates a lot of tension and uncomfortableness. Like it's really hard to hold the focus on our own perspective and agenda and others' perspectives and agendas. And so we shift so that we don't have to feel that tension anymore. And that means that like we'll kind of lose ourselves in that. If we can shift to passivity, that means, how do I not have agency? Well, I just don't have an agenda. I don't know what I want. And when we start thinking, oh, I don't know what I want, that allows us to override it and get past that initial tension. And this can be a useful agency strategy if we don't get stuck there. Sometimes you want to do something, but it's not the right time to do it. And it's better to shift to passivity. If you can't shift to passivity, it just means you have all this anger inside and it burns you up as you're trying to stop it. So shifting to passivity can be incredibly adaptive. It's the choose your battle strategy that is very important for navigating throughout the world. But If we're doing this all the time, attention is not being paid to the self and bringing one's own will into the world. Even though we started at anger and we started at seeing our own perspective in others, where we end up is we lose ourselves, and especially anything that helps with our own agency, because we're trying to avoid that. And just like I was saying with Anton, you can do this subconsciously where you don't feel like you're angry at all. Some nines will say, hey, I'm not angry at all, because they don't feel that initial impulse. It's so quick to shift to this peaceful state. Or we might do it consciously. So either you convince yourself that your agency doesn't matter, like, hey, this other person wants this more. So there might be an active thought involved, or the other way you can do it is by what it feels like to me is turning down the volume on the world. And this is the Enneagram fixation of ruminating, where I'm keeping myself company with my own thoughts as a way of not connecting to my body and what my body really needs me to do. It's like, at its worst, it can be like dissociating. And that's another way that we can forget. Okay. I've been talking for a while, so I want to make sure that we can stay engaged. So if we could all just take a moment to stretch, just for about 30 seconds, so that we can tap back in and, oh man, my body is sending me impulses that I'm too hot. So I'm going to act on those impulses and connect with my agency. All right. All right. Stretched out. Any questions about the agency types and points before we move on to bonding? Okay. All right. Bonding pathway. So these are for points 2, 3, and 4. And this is a very interesting emotional quality, because where I was saying with anger, it's just more of a spectrum of small to large amounts of anger. With the bonding pathway, it's that like flavor of sadness, but it can come out in a lot of different ways. So it could be sadness. The separation distress, I think, is really interesting in this framework because it draws attention to the fact that the heart types are so relationship focused. And I think normally when we talk about the Enneagram, we might bring attention to the shame component, which is part of it, or the sadness, the sorrow component, which is part of it. But this separation distress, those words, I think really hit at what it's there to do. And it might be grief, loneliness, rejection. If you do it a lot, it can build up into shame. Brene Brown has some wonderful things to say about that. Or it might look like feelings of abandonment, loss, sorrow. It has so many different flavors. And the upregulated version of this can really speak to how many different flavors. Melancholy is clearly one of them. So mutually supportive connections are core to human survival. And I think that's why we have both the positive emotion of that like care pathway we were talking about, and the negative emotion of this like sadness pathway. We have both. And also the instincts in our body. There's so many different parts that are trying to look for this social connection because it is so critical to us. I was actually talking with Jack Killen from the PDP Group about how hard it would be for humans to really live by ourselves. There's a reality TV show called Alone, where a human tries to survive on their own. And if you've ever watched it, it's like, whoa, that is hard. And even if you think you could survive on your own, it's probably because you bought a tent from other people and you bought supplies from other people. So we really are a communal species. This is so important. The other thing I wanted to say about it is this particular pathway has two components. One is the individuation. Who am I as a person? And are you seeing me for who I am? because that can allow us to get to the goal, which is love. Do you see me? And am I individuated? And it also has a component of being cared for and supported, that like movement of the support inward, versus I feel like the positive version is more like movement from the care outward. All right, let's get into how this shows. So the first one we're going to look at is the 4. And the reason I'm starting with 4 is because it's in line with what this pathway is trying to do. Pathway is there. I want to be seen, individuated, and I want to get bonds. I want people to love me. And when we're talking about seeking connection, it's this meaningful connection. Because if you have the meaningful connection and you're seen, that will satisfy this need for bonding. And so since it's in line, it's going to cause upregulation, that experience and express. And we know about people at type 4, just how large the emotional experience is in their world. And when we keep going down this pathway over and over, we can learn to identify with those emotions rather than realizing it's just a part of the experience, because it becomes such a big part of the experience. All right. So next, we have point 3. And point 3 is taking the downregulate approach. Like, okay, I see the need for being seen, being taken care of. That's important. But I'm going to downregulate it so that I can channel it into doing what needs to be done. And so this channeling into crafting an image that others will value. And when I say craft, I mean both like creating the image, but also there's a sense of making, building, getting things done. There's a doing part as well. And that's what downregulating allows us to do here at this point. And finally, to round us out, we have 2. And point 2 is the shift version. We still want to try and get our bonding needs met, but maybe now is not the time to ask for other people to care for us. Maybe now is the time to build relationships. And so with the 2, we're going to shift to that positive version of care. So you shift, you're like, it'll hit, oh, I feel the separation distress, and it'll shift it to, oh, what do you need? How can I care for you? How can I love you? What can I say to you that will make you feel more cared for? So that's the reframe and redirection version of this. So getting more into point 4, it'll start with either sadness, separation distress, whatever that flavor is, and then we upregulate it. And we might really feel it, experience and express. And this is where there's an interaction between our emotional pathways in the center of the brain and our thinking brain, the neocortex, because the thinking brain can help us with the upregulating by telling stories that help us to experience emotions. Hey, remember that time when that boyfriend dumped you? Didn't that suck? And then it goes right back into that same emotional pathway. So it reinforces that highway system. And for the 4, the orientation focuses inward. And remember that the key part of this pathway is the individuation. Who am I? Am I someone that some others would want to see and want to love? Am I worthy of love? Am I special enough? Also seeing inside my own need for bonding and connection, feeling that longing for other relationships, or maybe looking at the relationship we currently have and comparing it to internal romanticized ideals and feeling that longing for where it falls short, because we're constantly referring to that inside ideal version. And looking inside at our own feelings is part of that as well, that reinforcing. Why is this an effective bonding strategy? It encourages us to cultivate an image that is attractive and differentiated, that specialness. See me, look, I have this image. See the real me too. It's got that realness, the authenticity desire, so that you can, if you are really seen as your authentic self and the other person loves you, your survival needs will be met. But if we hang out here too long, we're not paying attention to the aspects of reality that don't align with our stories of disappointment and rejection. If remember what I was saying before, what we look for, we usually find. So if we're looking for sadness, because that's our normal way of being, we're going to find sadness rather than seeing, oh, actually, that was sweet. Sometimes we can see that, but we might miss points too. And especially simple joys and things that maybe aren't related to relationships will miss that sweetness of life. That doesn't happen in this pathway, because there's some sweetnesses you can experience in a relational sense, in a 4-point sense, but other things can be missed. And we don't want to miss out on the joys of life. That would be very sad indeed. Point 3. Okay, so we start out at sadness, separation, distress. For a 3, it might feel like someone maybe not approving of us, not valuing us, triggering some rejection feelings. But immediately when it hits, we want to downregulate it so that we can continue to do things. We don't, at point 3, want to be incapacitated by emotions that can happen at point 4. And so we downregulate. I want to channel this into doing what I need to do. And the orientation at point 3 is both inward and outward. So we're looking inward at individuation. Who am I? And our own goals and objectives and our need for bonding and connection. We're like, no, we do need this. And at the same time, we have this outward focus of how others see you and what others value. And you're trying to kind of make this work. And just like at point 9, how we saw holding that tension is so hard that we at point 9 drop our own agency. It's kind of similar at point 3. It's so hard to hold this tension that we can lose ourselves, our true, authentic, emotional selves, and get lost in confusing our own identity with what others value, or with what you're doing when you're acting it out, and downregulating so you can get things done. We might confuse ourselves for the actions we're taking. Why is this an effective strategy? Because you can do what needs to be done to be seen as successful and valuable. And that'll have others care for you. So like if we're back in caveman days and you're the best hunter, the tribe is certainly not going to kick you out. They will certainly look after your own needs. But while we're doing this, if we stay at this point too long, we're not going to be paying attention to our own authentic hearts and emotions, because we're so focused on being, as they say, a human doing instead of a human being. Point 2, we start out at the same place. We're starting out with sadness, separation, distress. We may or may not be aware that that's where we're starting from. Like similar to point 9, it can be conscious or unconscious how we're doing this shift. Either way, we're shifting to that care love pathway. And so it replaces the feeling of sadness with a feeling of, let me take care of you. That, oh, I want to, being moved forward. In fact, with the empathy pathways that help us feel what the other person's feeling so that we can know what they need to be comforted or whatever they need in life, actually takes the place of our normal signals to see how we are feeling. And so it's like it overrides it, which can be very painful. And get rid of, responding in other ways. Like I was saying, the important part here is flexibility. So with 2, our orientation is outward. because we're not seeing our own needs. So we're connecting with others' needs, how to care for them, how others might see you might be part of that. And there's a constant thinking in the neocortex of, okay, how is this relation doing? How is that relationship doing? What does this person need? What are they going through? How can I help them? That outward focus. So why is this an effective bonding strategy? Well, when you take care of others, the connection between us is strengthened. It's a type of looking for bonding, but it's more like, let's bond with me giving to you, with an idea that hopefully the other person will be there for me when I need them. And so sometimes that second part can be part of this giving to get part of point 2 that sometimes happens. I'm hoping that by just being on the positive side of the bonding feelings, the other side is going to come. And maybe it does, and maybe it doesn't. I see Nancy's like, I can tell you, lived experience, it doesn't work that way. But I think if we're flexible and just come here, sometimes it can work that way. Like, do you really want to be friends with someone who never takes care of you? You're hoping that your connections will also go this way. Sometimes, just not all the time. Because all the time it doesn't work. Because when we're doing it a lot, we don't pay attention to our own need to be seen and cared for. We are just jumping right out of that, similar to what we saw at 9 with our own desire for agency. And with type 2, at point 2, I think we've all experienced what it's like to shift. So for example, like if you just imagine for a second that you are feeling like you really need a friend, you really need some support, really feel that. So you give them a call. But when you call them, you find out their partner was just in a car crash and is in the hospital. And immediately you might feel this flip from, oh, I need support from you, to let me support you. That's that shift we're talking about. And so it can be incredibly adaptive, but again, not all the time. Could you imagine every time you need support from a friend, instead you flip to, oh my gosh, they need my help? Not always. All right. Any questions or comments about the bonding points, that bonding pathway, before we move on? The certainty pathway. We're trying to seek certainty. As we all know from this world, that is not possible 100% of the time. There will always be uncertain things. How do we know how much we need to pay attention to certainty? That's the question for points 5, 6, and 7. So similar to the agency pathway, we're seeing a spectrum here, where on one side we have just a little of uncertainty, doubt, and then we get more worry. We might get into fear. If we are in it a lot, we might get to anxiety, or even if it's acute, this dread or terror might come up. But it's any flavor of that is going to go along this pathway. When this is there so that we can prepare and plan for what is coming, so that any threats can either be avoided or managed. And that's why all of these types are going to be looking at safety and planning. There's a lot of future orientation to this certainty with what it's intending to do. And fear is there to let us know what we need to pay attention to in order to stay safe. You know, have you looked at what you need to look at? Have you checked to see that your doors are locked? Have you looked behind the bushes? Have you planned? Is there a fire extinguisher somewhere in your house? How do we plan for what might happen, any potential dangers? And the certainty pathway has strong connections to the neocortex, because the neocortex is where our thinking brain is. And so depending on which point we're at, we want to maybe connect with the neocortex to help us with the planning and preparation, but that's also going to make your mind feel very busy and make thoughts feel quite quick, depending again on which point you're at. All right, point 6. I'm starting with point 6 because what point 6 is there to do is to help us watch for risks and be ready, which is exactly what fear is there to do, which is why in type 6, we're going to upregulate the fear, upregulate the anxiety, the whatever that is. And that's going to be experienced and expressed. Now, we do talk sometimes about the counterphobic 6. With the counterphobic 6, there's still going to be an upregulated experience. It's just what they do with that upregulated experience is going to be different than a phobic 6. And we'll see at point 7 what it looks like to not have the upregulation. Okay, at point 5. Point 5 is taking a different thing. Let me downregulate this fear so that I can do what needs to be done. I want to channel it into collecting enough knowledge and resources to be able to handle whatever uncertainties might come. And if I feel too much fear, that's going to get in the way of me doing this. So let me contain it and channel it. And 7, that's our reframers. So I see uncertainty, I'm concerned with uncertainty, but I'm going to reframe it as an opportunity. So I can shift out of this negative emotion into a more positive emotion that will help me take advantage of those opportunities. So that's our reframe and redirect version. So again, the difference between a counterphobic 6 and 7 is that the counterphobic 6 feels the upregulation and they'll take the action to calm that for a little bit. It's like, I want to clear out this fear that I'm having by doing the risky thing. I can get a little bit of a break before the upregulation comes back. And on the other hand, with the 7, we may or may not be feeling the original fear, but it's certainly not going to be an upregulated state. The overall emotional feeling is going to be more that shift. And we're shifting to the, typically we're shifting to the joy pathway, the playful. That's why 7s can be so humorous as a strategy. Diving deeper into point 6. So we're starting with fear, upregulating, really feeling that fear. And at the same time, our orientation is both inward and outward. My gosh, what an intense experience. We're looking both inward at our internal doubts. So we're doubting ourselves. We're pointing the fear inward. Do I have enough information? Do I have the right answer? Have I made the right decision? Do I understand things enough? And so there's this forever doubting experience towards ourselves. And at the same time, we're looking at the outer world. Can I trust this person? Can I trust this situation? How might things change? What could go wrong? Just doubts, 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 inward and outward at the same time. And why is this a useful strategy? By doubting everything and everyone, including myself, except for some people I trust. That's why trust is such an important value for people at point 6, because it's like, whew, I can finally relax. So by doubting everything else, I will notice whatever is going to be a problem and I can prepare for it. And that's the strategy. And it can be very adaptive. There are times when it really makes sense to try and figure out what's going to go wrong and prepare for it. If we don't do that, we're going to get caught off guard. But if we're doing it all the time, we're not paying attention to places where we actually have the capacity to navigate uncertainty. If we're trying to make the entirety of life perfectly planned for and certain, that is a losing game. But we have a way to help us, and we have a capacity to navigate uncertainty in the moment. But when we live our whole life at point 6, we don't really know that. It's hard to trust that. Point 5, we're starting at fear, but we're down regulating. Okay, I'm afraid of uncertainty, but I'm going to channel this into something productive. And our orientation is inward. We're looking at our internal resources. Do we have enough knowledge? Do we have enough energy? Do I have enough time? And because we're always asking ourselves those questions, we're going to be looking for more of it than we necessarily need. So the answer is almost going to be, no, I don't have enough knowledge yet. No, I don't have enough energy yet. No, I don't have enough time. Give me more time to do all these things and get extra prepared. And that's if there's a highway going there. So you're always asking yourself the question. But sometimes this is exactly what we need to do. Sometimes we need to have enough resources. If we're going to go do something new, sometimes it can be really helpful to do some background work and learn about it. That's why you all are here tonight. We're all doing this 0.5 and upping our knowledge. And why is this a useful strategy? If you have enough knowledge and resources, then even if life is uncertain, we can handle it. Because we're like a Boy Scout, prepared. I love going camping with one of my beloved fives, because no matter what happens, he has all the information needed to deal with it. But while we're hanging out at 0.5, what are we not paying attention to? We're not experiencing the fullness of life, particularly emotional, relational, and experiential. We're missing out on things because we're constantly asking, do we have enough knowledge? Do we have enough resources? We're never actually getting out into the world and having the wonderful fullness of what life can bring and getting the full spectrum of those experiences. And by the way, more experiences will help you be more prepared. So it is a resource. It's just not seen as a resource when we're there in 0.5. 0.7. We're starting at the same point. We're starting out at fear, but we're going to shift, because another way we can deal with fear is by shifting it to the excitement pathway. I'm going to get excited. I'm going to feel joyful. I'm going to find humor. I'm going to find the opportunities. I'm going to find the options, right? This is not uncertainty. This is options. And our orientation is outward. It's looking at new experiences, new things, plans for the future, that anticipating mind, looking for the joy and excitement. Pursuit of pleasure and pleasurable experiences, exciting opportunities. That's what we're constantly focusing on at 0.7. Why is this a good strategy? Because another way to see uncertainty is opportunity. And then you can actually get the gifts that uncertainty brings. There are good things about uncertainty. We can take advantage of those things. We can use these opportunities to increase the chance of survival. Can you imagine if, like, our caveman ancestors looked at everything and said, oh, if it's not certain, I'm not doing it? We would miss so many inventions and discoveries. We would never leave the cave. This is an important point to go to. Just not all the time, because when we're here, we're not paying attention to negative emotions and what they have to teach us. If we're constantly shifting to the positive, we're missing those messages that the negative emotions are there to teach us. And that can be its own form of being stuck and being limited, which is what the type 7 is wanting, to not be limited. And yet they limit themselves by not paying attention to what in life is painful. All right. Any questions or comments now that we've gone through all of the types at this point? Hopefully this is making sense. AK.
Yeah, I was wondering, knowing your audience now has a deeper meaning, I guess. Have you come across any statistical data for like what the proportions of the 9 types of Enneagram archetypes are in the world, or is it like a generational thing? Thanks.
Yes and no. Yes, you can find those statistics. Do I necessarily trust them? No. And part of the reason I struggle with those statistics is because it's self-reporting, and it is hard to really correctly type yourself. And so when I look at these things where it's like, hey, we're an Enneagram website, and we polled all the people who went to the website, I don't know how deep their understanding is. So I take it with a grain of salt and a half. What I do see in these statistics is a little bit more, it seems more even distribution than you would think. So there doesn't seem to be any big gaps or oh, whoa, everyone's a, 3 or whatever. The other thing, there's so much complexity to typing. You'll get families that all kind of are like a certain type, or communities that are like a certain type, and that can add flavors, which can mean that sometimes people can mistake themselves for that. It can get very complex. So unless I actually saw a real vigorous scientific study, which I have not, I take it with a big grain of salt. But I feel like even distribution might make sense, because all of these strategies do seem like really important, useful strategies. But I am not certain.
Okay,
Does that
and
help?
yeah, thank you. Second question following up that one would be, how long do people stay in their point of Enneagram archetype, or do they go through all of them in their life?
Well, your core point, which is where the highways have really been built up over time, the core point itself doesn't change. There will always be more highways to a particular point than the others because of neuroplasticity. But, the more we do inner work and the more we intentionally work with the Enneagram symbol, we can move around to the different points and be more flexible. And that is where the freedom is found. So we will always be our type, but we won't always show up as our type. And there's actually a concept in the Enneagram called levels of development. And so as you get more and more unhealthy, you really get fixated at your type, and also usually like the low point of what they call your disintegration arrow, which is a secondary type that comes in to mess with you as well. But the higher up in terms of health you go, the less differentiated. Like if you read, oh, this is the highest level for point whatever, they barely seem like that point at all. And that's because they're moving around the symbol in an adaptive, flexible way. So you can't change your type, but you can move around, and that is the whole point. Okay, so what can we learn from this whole system? The first is it validates one of the triads that we see in the Enneagram, and that's the centers of intelligence. So we can actually see in the neurology, yes, agency corresponds with gut-centered types, bonding corresponds with heart-centered types, certainty corresponds with the head center type. So we can validate that with this theory. Other thing is the harmonic triads actually winds up coming up in here too. And if you've been really paying attention and you know the harmonic triads, you might have noticed that. So the harmonic triads breaks up the points into 3 groups. The first one is 1s, 3s, and 5s, or the competency triad. What does this mean? This means that when you're dealing with conflict, when you're dealing with challenges, your go-to strategy is I'm going to be competent. I'm going to take care of this because I'm competent at it. And then we have the emotional realness group, the 4, 6, and 8. And when they have challenges, when they have conflicts, they're like, you know what? I am going to go to my emotions. If we can really express our true emotions and get it all out on the table, that is the best way to solve this challenge. And so you can imagine in conflicts, we got one emotional realness and one not. That can be an interesting coming together. And then finally, we have the positive outlook group, the 2, 7s, and 9s. And it's like, if there's a challenge, the way I'm going to deal with it is I am going to find the silver lining and go there. What is positive here? We don't need to get hung up on all these challenges and conflicts. What if we just move forward in a positive way? So I'm going to open it up to the group. Has anyone noticed what these groups have in common? Why does this make sense within this framework we've been looking at? All right, this is what I've seen. Competency. What these three types all have in common, they are all down-regulating. They are all controlling and channeling their emotions. And what does this mean in the brain? This means that we have less activity in the limbic system where the emotions are going. Remember, they're reducing that, which frees up more energy for the neocortex, which is what allows us to be competent. I am going to have less emotion so that I can be more competent, think more clearly, do what I need to do. And you might guess the emotional realness are the upregulators. They're the experience and expressors. By increasing the activity in the limbic system, we're not as much in the neocortex, except to kind of work with it. But the main thing is I'm going to use the wisdom of my emotions to drive me forward. And that is where I'm going to have, it's like almost finding competency in emotions and using them to navigate. Positive outlook group. That's the reframe and redirect. These are all the shifters. And so you have the initiating negative emotion, redirecting to a positive emotion. And that is their superpower. So that is why they're going to want to go there. The 2 is moving to the caring vector. 7 is moving to the seeking or play vectors. And the 9 moving towards peace. It's like, no, it's not really a problem. And you know what? Actually, sometimes that works. I know it doesn't sound like reality, but sometimes it is a very adaptive strategy. As a positive outlooker myself, it's just not a great one to get stuck in. Just like everything else has a blind spot. Okay, what can we do with all of this? Back to neuroplasticity. Neuroplasticity created these patterns, but you can reshape it using neuroplasticity. So even though a lot of these are so automatic and subconscious, they happen so fast, we can use our conscious control. So we look in our neocortex and we say, you know what, I want to act differently. When I have a situation and I'm starting to feel a reaction, I'm going to pause and be intentional with where I go next. And the more you do that, and the more you're intentional about what you're going to do once you start to feel a reaction, the more you can be in a more intentional response. And at first, it is a lot of effort, but those highwaymen are going to be helping you. So keep going. It's going to get easier the more you do it. AK, I see you have a question.
Yeah, I was wondering, what would be one of the more precise websites to do an Enneagram test on for your car type? Which one would you
Good.
recommend?
So what I'd recommend first is not to take a test as gospel. Because here's the thing, the best Enneagram tests are about 60% accurate. So keep that in mind. The best thing that I recommend for taking a test is make sure that you're taking a test that gives you other possibilities. So it's not just going to say, hey, you're a 4 and then end there. And then once you get some initial ideas, then you can look more at types, do your own investigation and do your own self-observation. And like I said, I am a coach. I can definitely help you if you want to narrow down your type. Personally, if I'm going to pick a test, I do like the RHETI test, RHETI. And then there was another new one that I just got to looking at that was pretty good, that's made by Beatrice Chestnut and Aranio. But I'm currently not finding what it's called. It's like a compass. I think it has the word compass in it. And that's been slightly better, but these are both paid tests. So, I mean, really the answer is self-inquiry and learning more about the Enneagram, which is actually great because self-inquiry, always useful. Like knowing more about yourself, awesome. And learning about the Enneagram, I think, is also a good idea because as we learn about the different points, even if it's like, oh, I feel like I'm a blah, blah, blah right now, and it turns out you aren't, there's a lot of value in learning about that point and thinking about yourself in those ways as you grow into a deeper understanding. AK.
Yeah, thanks. I was curious to know if there's any causal relationship with enneagrams, archetypes, and zodiac signs and symbols in astrology.
I don't have experience in that area, but I do know some people who mix those two systems. I know one person in particular has told me that she uses the Enneagram for more persistent patterns and things throughout life, but then moves to looking at astrology when she's looking at time and events. But that is not an area that I have looked at. All right. Good questions. All right, I always like to end every presentation with how you can take it home. So in addition to neuroplasticity, as Dan Siegel would say, turning prisons into playgrounds. When we get stuck in these habitual patterns, they can turn into prisons if we're getting stuck in one way of responding, one pathway. But things that they recommend, playing with other ways of managing the emotion of your core type. So whatever pathway, like if you're a body type, we're talking about the agency pathway. So playing with other ways to experience anger. If you tend to always shift, what does it feel like to instead be with it and try and upregulate it? That sort of thing. Because with the highway at work, they're going to be hitting that pathway so often, but when you're hitting that pathway, you can then try and respond a different way once you've hit it. Interestingly, this system actually also points to the truth of tri-type, which I like to hold gently, but I'm just going to mention it here for those who know. But it also highlights how important that core pathway is. So tri-type is true, and it's can be seen in personality, but when we really look at what is that emotion that the highway is leading to, that's going to be at the core of working with your type. The other thing that they recommended here, which I have not seen elsewhere, is to play with similarly oriented paths. So I was talking about how some of these are oriented inward, some are outward, some are both. And if it's true that you can play with similarly oriented pathways, that actually points out a new triad that I haven't seen elsewhere. So the both pattern, the both ways, that's 3, 6, and 9, which has appeared in other triads. But this one also shows the 1, 4, and 5. So if you're a 1 and your attention is inward, you might want to try playing out with going to 4 or 5 to use that same inward focus, but just in a different way. And the same thing with the 2, 7s, and 8s with their outward focus. I haven't played with that much myself, but that's one of the things the PDP group is recommending. And then finally, using presence to relax the need to engage pathways at all. When we are in presence, and that's why I wanted to do that at the start of this whole talk, we experience the world with more wholeness. And this is more similar to the experience we have in the womb before we had to work to survive. And we realize that working to survive using those pathways is actually less necessary in the present moment than our habitual attention leads us to believe. So when you're present, just being here now with what is, we realize, hey, there actually isn't a tiger here right now. I don't have to be in fear. I don't have to be thinking about all the things I need to do today. I don't have to be worrying about this, that, and the other. Right here, I'm safe, I'm whole. And the world is pretty good most of the time. We worry about so many things, but we rarely actually have something where it's like, oh, yeah, actually, that is something to worry about. So in presence, we can learn to relax and just have that'll help reduce reduce that automatic response. And when we're in presence, it helps us realize that we're already whole. That's where you might experience holy ideas in the Enneagram world. All right. A few more resources if you want to learn more about what I talked about tonight. There's a book by Dan Siegel on behalf of the PDP group that just came out, I think, in the last year. So if you want to take a picture of that, feel free. I also got a lot from Jaak Pansep's book, one of his books, The Emotional Foundations of Personality. You're going to find a lot about evolution. This is really focusing on the pathways themselves. It's not going to talk about the Enneagram, but it was quite thorough. And then finally, there's so many resources for emotional regulation. This one's comprehensive and a little bit higher level reading, but so are the other two books. But it's just one of the options. And finally, for more information, here's me and my contact information. Feel free to write it down if you want a copy of these slides or you want to work with me further. There is that. All right. Come back to the group. Thanks for sticking with me. That was a lot, and I appreciate it. Any final questions before we move to closing out? Or comments? Ahas? Yes? Anything like that?
I certainly appreciated the anger because today I was more angry than I've been in a very, very long time. I'm not an angry person. I let myself feel it. I even did a little shouting in the shower, and then I took this class and I felt so much better. So thank you. I learned a lot.
Well, good. Yeah, and come next week. We're going to be talking about anger too. Wonderful. Glad to help. Anton.
One, I don't know if I want to say this is a aha, but it makes sense. When you were talking about agency and how the anger can happen with a lack of agency, I was also thinking about how, oh, that's how resentment can build. Because if you feel like you don't have agency or you actually don't have agency in a certain scenario, then one of the common reactions is feeling resentment. So I could relate to that. But a question that I had was like for any of the ABC, you were talking about how fear is for different types of fears for our survival. So does it mean that we always have to have some level, even if it's a subtle level of fear, in order to make a decision or in order to effectively act on something?
Yeah, I think they're all necessary, but I don't think we need as much as we think we do.
Yeah.
I think it is always, I think it is generally a good idea in life to have a questioning. Like, let me leave a little room for doubt. Like, I feel like at its most small, like just a touch, it almost feels more like curiosity and openness. Like if it's just I'm trying to get to where I can just feel touches of the emotions. And yeah, I would say all three are definitely important to never lose.
That's exactly it. I try not to be, I mean, for one thing, I often experience curiosity, but I try not to be 100% certain on anything. That doesn't mean I can't be confident, but like I have like to have that space of like, well, I don't want to think I completely know, because then that doesn't
Mhm.
allow adaptability. So yeah.
Yeah. It's interesting with type ones are said to have a missing head center. And the reason they're said to do that is because they're missing some of that curiosity. And so it can lead to more hardened opinions that are less open to what is true now. So yeah, curiosity for sure. And the resentment piece is really interesting because yeah, to resentment over time or anger over time leads to resentment in a similar way that the separation distress over time leads to shame. They're like, what happens if it builds? Yeah, yeah. All right, great. Well, let's go around the room, have some final closing nuggets. If you have any final questions, feel free to add it as part of your closing nugget or just something you learned or something you want to say, whatever feels like you want to put in the mix. Nancy, I see you first, so I'm going to pick on you first and then Jill.
Sophia, I'm just so grateful for you and all you're bringing to the community. Thank you. This was very rich and fun to hear. Yeah, thank you.
Jill and then Anton.
Yes, I loved even like being reminded that neuroplasticity can loosen rigid patterns. Just hearing these facts and applying them is amazing. So thank you.
Wonderful. Anton and then Rachel.
Yeah, I definitely like, even though I overwhelm myself collecting information, like that's the other side of curiosity. It's like, oh, this is interesting. Oh, this is interesting. And then I just have 8 things that I don't know what to do with all of that. But and that's the reason why or one of the reasons why I joined the meeting tonight. But I think I relate to the point 6 as far as the planning. I tried to do a certain amount of it, but if somebody's like, let's plan all this out, it just sounds exhausting to me. So like I have some amount of planning, but it is more information gathering, and that fits in with the point 5. So just some thoughts in there.
Yeah. All right, Rachel and then Joanne.
Thank you all. I'm delighted to get to know about this community and connect with you all more. The material is really resonant. I really appreciated it. And a nugget that I'm leaving with that feels important is expanding my thinking around, like I've often thought about, okay, so type 2 moving to 4 and the being more emotionally honest and how that aligns with the upregulating and how one, I can also just practice the downregulating piece too, but in some ways it feels like the order of operations is to upregulate so I can like actually experience it and express it. And then the downregulating of, okay, now that I've done that, how can I actually channel it into something more useful?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it feels like a helpful way to think about like, sure, it's good to express an experience just because it is, but then also connecting more to then more becomes available actually after that it isn't just like the end of the road.
Yeah. Yeah. I can so resonate as a fellow shift type that moving to upregulating and experiencing that first, even though it's real scary, is great. And then downregulating is easier.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I would just say, well, thank you, Sophia, for all the content this evening. I'm Dan, by the way. This is Rachel. I work with a very strong and pronounced, to the best of my understanding, type 7. And it's just, I always find it very interesting to see like a coherent sort of differentiation of the types when I think about the, observing my own patterns, going from fear to basically anything that's positive and exciting, which I do constantly. But also seeing like the an articulation of the types of like the important people in my life, and helps give me more empathy for their experience when I see other people reacting or acting in certain ways that are quite different from how I would act or react, and the symbiosis or tension that results with the people that I'm in relationship with. So thank you for that.
Wonderful. Thanks for being here, both of you. Christy and then Saskia.
Yeah, thank you. It's my first time to this community. Appreciate the learning. Thank you, Sophia.
Awesome.
And I echo what Dan said. I think that I'm always trying to not only better understand my own reactions, but have more empathy for other types and in my life. So this has been, it's always helpful to see those differentiations. Thank you.
Thanks for coming. Saskia and then AK.
Hi. Yeah, I'm still very new to the Enneagram, and it's been really interesting to hear about all of the different types and their reactions to different things, and the ways that it's not just your own reactions are the only way, because it's easy to, in the moment, be like, why are you acting that way? Like, that makes no sense to me, because as I'm still figuring out if I'm a 7 or an 8, it's like logic is the biggest thing to me. So whenever someone reacts more heart, it's like it doesn't make sense all the time. So hearing all of this, it's been really eye-opening, and there was a lot of really great topics covered and questions asked that were really awesome. So thank you so much.
Thanks for coming. Love to see you here. All
I'm
right,
really glad I got
AK.
to make it.
Yeah. All right, AK. Finish us out.
Yeah, thanks for answering all my questions. And yeah, super excited to rewatch the YouTube video when it comes out and share it with people I know. Thanks.
Wonderful. Yeah. Well, thank you everyone for spending the night with me. I'm really grateful that you're all here, because if you weren't here, this would just be me, and that would be super sad. I mean, I love all this knowledge, but my favorite thing is to share it. So thank you all for coming, and I hope to see you again at one of these circles. All right. Bye.